We thought
Okay.
Georgia in the past was sort of like this perfect specimen coming into the season. It seemed as if it was them or Ohio State or Oregon or a handful of teams that we kind of put up on a pedestal. But our number 2 item that somewhat defined this week 3 was a Georgia clunker.
Yes.
We had a clunker in Lexington, Kentucky. Georgia beat Kentucky 13-12. They were a 24 and a half point favorite at one point in time going into this football game. I will take now as the perfect opportunity to remind people that you can go out to merch.solidverbal.com and pick up your very own shirt that says "Win Your Clunkers." It's not just a t-shirt, it is a life mantra if you're ever so inclined. But I just kept kind of wondering to myself, so does this mean that what happened at Kentucky last week against South Carolina was a look-ahead spot for the Cats? I'm really having a hard time trying to understand what this team is now. I know what Georgia is, and I could read stats. I won't read stats. That's boring. Clearly, they had a hard time trying to decipher this Kentucky defense. I just don't know what to make of Kentucky now after this because they could have won this game.
Well, I think it's also a game of matchups too, right? What South Carolina offers on offense is a little bit different. They're a bit more of a wild card on offense, that Lenore Sellers is inexperienced and offers something athletically that Carson Beck, while athletic, it's a different game plan when you play this version of South Carolina than what you're seeing with Georgia, where you have a lot more tape on Georgia. And it might have just been a bad matchup. It might have been a bad game plan, bad preparation, whatever. It could have been a look-ahead element to it. Although, I don't know. With early SEC game, I just don't think that Kentucky was like, we are not concerned at all about this limited action that we have in the conference. Yeah,
it's almost like they had no game plan last week whatsoever. And so that's why this performance, I think, was all the more shocking. It was a 1-point loss at home, and it was there. It was absolutely there. We kept waiting. We were talking on Slack about, wow, the live line at halftime came all the way down to -4.5. I threw a few shekels on that. Georgia usually wins games like this going away. They never pulled away. They could not solve that Kentucky defense. Maybe that's a good sign for the Cats moving forward. They still need to get that offense on track against better opponents, but maybe this is a good sign in its own right that they held Georgia down in the manner that they did.
I mean, don't forget that Kirby Smart hasn't exactly annually brutalized Mark Stoops in Kentucky, right? They've had a lot of weird, I won't say close games, but closer than you'd think given other results, like a 15-5, a 20-7 type thing where it's 13-7 at halftime and it's not even a crock-potting. It's just all right, it's a win. It wasn't pretty, but it's a win. And Kirby's had some of those against Mark Stoops in Kentucky. I think maybe 2 out of their last 3, 2 of the last 4 matchups, something like that, like a Will Levis team that was pretty good in Athens, if I remember. So I think that's why I was reticent when we were previewing this game that that might have just been Kentucky's worst day, and you're not supposed to judge a team on their best day or their worst day. That might have just been their worst day. They just handled that preparation and execution really poorly. So catching up to tonight now, Kentucky's defense was all over the place. Georgia's offense was also pretty sloppy and made mistakes, but Kentucky's defense, their game plan to run the hell out of the ball and maybe get some timely third downs here and there was good. They just had no explosion on this offense, Kentucky. And if you are going to seriously challenge Georgia, you've got to have 3 pitches. You've got to have something downfield. You got to maybe have a couple trick plays. You have to have a game plan that you're able to execute and then build off of. And it was 1.5 pitches for Kentucky with the defense and running the ball somewhat. Running hard, to be clear.
And I remember talking with you after Kentucky's first game, how it was clear with what Bush Hampton was trying to do in that game.
Yeah.
And we wondered, is this any kind of precursor for what's to come? Because what they did in that game is they stretched teams out side to side.
Yeah.
Hold them apart and then attack the seams vertically. Didn't have much of, if any of that in this game against Georgia. Much better opponent, mind you. But at some point in time, and this is true for a lot of the teams that we'll discuss tonight, you got to find some of that explosion. And Kentucky just couldn't do that against Georgia. What I do think is interesting now for Georgia, and Kirby Smart even addressed this when he was talking to Molly McGrath in the postgame, his point was, look, we got to be focused. We have to be mindful of the fact that we have gone on the road against some of these SEC opponents over the last couple of years. He mentioned the Mizzou game 2 years ago. He mentioned the Auburn game last year. It's not easy on the road in the SEC, especially in these night games. They've got road tilts against Bama, Texas, and Ole Miss coming up. as
Right.
the season progresses. This is not to say they're going to lose any of those games. They will obviously compete pretty highly. But the point being, they have struggled a little bit in some of these spots, and those are quality opponents. You just don't know what could happen.
And by the way, on the flip side, the good news for Kentucky is if you're a Kentucky fan, yeah, you're upset about last week. Yes, you're definitely upset about how tantalizingly close you kind of were tonight until Georgia kind of slowly bled Kentucky out. But you look at the defenses that Kentucky's facing. If the complaint is the offensive line, especially after last week with what South Carolina was able to do, you look at what they face the rest of the year, there will be opportunities for this offense to grow and to find or reinforce the playmakers that they have outside, whatever, and figure out that it's just like you're going against Kennard and Dylan Stewart for South Carolina last week. You're going against Georgia's front this week. That's a tough one, too. It won't be that every week if you're Kentucky. And that's it won't make you feel good as you listen to this, but maybe by Wednesday or Thursday.
By Wednesday or Thursday, once it has a chance to digest. Here's my final question, then we got to get to point 3.
Please.
Mindful of the fact that polls don't really matter. Georgia is number 1, not just in both the AP and coaches poll, but also our Verballer Top 12 poll, which you can sign up to vote for at verballers.com.
Yeah.
You are a voter in that poll. I am a voter in that poll. When you cast your vote tomorrow, is Georgia still the top team?
I think so. It's Georgia, then Ohio State, then Texas. That's what our top 3 is.
Yep.
Ohio State was off week 3. I don't remember seeing them play today. I am older than I used to be, Ty, as we all are. I think so. I'm not going to hold this kind of thing against Georgia because their track record is such. We're like, yes, they're going to win some close or some weird, some ugly games like they were able to do tonight, and they got it done eventually, and maybe they struggled on offense, maybe they struggled in the red zone, maybe they struggled with mental errors, but I don't know. I'm not willing to reward Ohio State for anything today. I'm not willing to reward Texas for anything today, as great as they looked against UTSA and Arch Manning, and we'll get there. But, yeah, they're my number 1 team.
Okay.